Well, I wanted to just make a few remarks about this case 01-10. It's a favorite case of mine as a teacher of engineering ethics. And as I might have said in other videos, cases like this are BER cases, Board of Ethical Review. It's something that the NSPE does a very valuable service where they examine usually fictional or semi-fictional situations involving engineers and ethical problems. Some of them are based on real life very closely. Some of them are completely fictional. They're for teaching purposes, but they're incredibly valuable for material for engineering ethics. It's a practical way. This case is not about anything really incredibly important, right? You know, the heart and soul of engineering ethics is the first canon. It's public safety, public welfare. Those are the really big cases, and cases involving, duties to clients, cases involving, really, public corruption, things like that, because engineers do get involved in public corruption. Sometimes, usually civil engineers, I have to say, but not always. Automotive engineers in the United States have gone to jail recently. It can happen, right? Big issues. This is not a big issue. This is about getting over, right? 01-10. It's about taking advantage of somebody. It's about acting in bad faith in a way that is usually very, sort of safe way. I mean, in the sense that I have no idea how this engineer could possibly have been called to account for what they did. I mean, it's really a matter of, their internal state of mind. The engineer A knows, with the kind of certainty that we can ever know things, right? Is sure that he's not going to take a job with this particular employer, XYZ, whatever they call it here. I mean, the engineer knows that insofar as we can know anything, right, about life, there's always uncertainty and anything can happen. But that's one of the excuses we make sometimes for mistreating people or for not being completely truthful or for taking advantage of people. In this case, the engineer, with as much certainty as, again, we can know about these things, knows that they are going to take a job with ABC rather than XYZ. XYZ has offered them a trip, a recruiting trip, I guess you'd call it, and persuade this person to go with them. But they know that they're not. And the only reason they take the offer is because it offers a travel opportunity. Right? XYZ happens to be located near a resort of some sort. And right, combining a trip with a post-graduation vacation. And the question is there anything unethical about accepting that trip under those conditions? The board says some interesting things. The ethical obligation of the engineer to be truthful and honest in professional affairs, and the obligation to be faithful to the employer. It's a sentence fragment, I know. The board has consistently taken the position that these are not areas for compromise. Well, I mean, as sometimes happens in ethical reasoning, they made a mistake here, of course. The obvious mistake being there's no question of being faithful to an employer because the engineer doesn't have an employer yet. So that really can't be. I don't know if it's a mistake, but it's not really relevant. You're talking about potential employers. So as we see, the fourth canon tells the engineer that they have certain ethical duties to their employers and clients, duties that don't apply to other people, right? There's special duties that are established by that relationship of being someone's engineer. So the engineer has no duty or obligation to the prospective employer that they don't have to anyone else. Right? But that's sort of the point. Right? I think. Right. In the second quote there, the board believes that it is particularly important for the graduate engineer early in his or her career to establish appropriate norms of professional conduct. And maybe that's exactly what's at issue here. What does professional conduct mean? I think there's a word used, let's see, yes, in this quote here. Engineer A compromised his personal and professional integrity by his decision to accept XYZ's offer without disclosing his decision concerning ABC. That is the crux of the matter. I mean, there's nothing wrong with taking this trip. There's nothing wrong with accepting it, and there's nothing wrong with going skiing or whatever too while you're there, as long as you disclose to the prospective employer exactly what the situation is. If you tell them, listen, there is very little chance that I'm going to accept this job with you. I've already decided to accept it with ABC. If you disclose that and they still want to bring you out, then you can go out and do whatever you like. But that's the crux of the matter is disclosure, of being open with people, being honest with people. When especially in a case like this where there's an opportunity not to be honest, right? Not to be fully honest. And the word I wanted to emphasize here is integrity, especially professional integrity, and maybe that's a very, very important part of being professional in this sense in which we're exploring it. Is that it's not that your integrity is constantly at risk as a professional. It's not that something you have to worry about constantly, but it's something that you have to sort of jealously guard as a professional. Your integrity, the idea that you do what you say, that you are reliable, that you actually hold to and live by the principles that you believe in and the basic principles of the profession. That is something that is quite a valuable commodity, actually, having integrity. And so that, I mean, in a case like this, if you're shown to be a person who is going to choose, their own selfish sort of good over, the obligation to treat people with respect, then that's something that, that's not a good thing to lose. That is that reputation, and just your own sort of self-respect, I guess, as a professional. And I mean, this all may seem very unconvincing. I don't know. It's not a big deal. The person took a trip when if they were holding themselves to the highest standards of honesty, they wouldn't have taken it, or at least they would have explained the situation before accepting any offer. Sure, I think we all probably could agree with that. Now, we may not agree that this rises to the level of an ethical lapse, as they say. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe they're making too much of it, but they're obviously trying to send a message. No one thinks that this is the worst thing an engineer ever did. But the BER is sending a message to people like you, young engineers. And part of it is just maturity, right? I mean, this is something that a kid does, basically. And if it's an adult who does it, it's an adult who's acting like a kid. Somebody who's trying to get over. Somebody who's playing the system or gaming the system. Because I don't think there's any question that Engineer A took advantage of XYZ. Certainly they did. It might not be the worst thing anyone's ever done. Certainly not. We've all done worse, right? But it's not somebody who's holding themselves to sort of grown-up, mature, and especially professional standards probably should think of doing.